So the Victoria line can carry 10 times more people per hour than a 6-lane motorway.
Yes. Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's a point that people don't quite grasp. When I talk about railways being awesome, that's kind of what I mean. Like, nothing beats that. Nothing will beat that capacity. And that is an electrified railway. It's a clean railway. It's efficient. It's safe because we have a completely managed system. That's another advantage of railways, is that we've built all these safety systems to make sure they're safe. People go, oh, railways are so expensive. Well, because you get a system that's that much better.
If I was to ask you what the most efficient mode of transport is, you might say cars. After all, they're very efficient. You might say planes. They're very fast. But actually, the answer is trains. Not a particularly new mode of transport, but used on a regular basis by hundreds of millions of people around the world. They've been around in this country since the early 19th century. Today's guest is an authority on all things trains related. They're an engineer, they have a podcast, they are very much ensconced within the industry. I plan to ask everything from Hyperloop to whether or not we need HS2 to why do we keep on getting signal failures every time I'm coming into London. Gareth Dennis, thanks for joining us and welcome to Downstream.
Thanks for having me.
I've wanted to talk about trains for a really long time. And you're the right guy to talk to. You've got this new book out, How the Railways Will Fix the Future.
There it is.
With Repeater. Rediscovering the essential brilliance of the Iron Road. It's something, like I said, I want to talk about for a long time, and I've often pestered the RMT to speak to Mick Lynch, and they say, I mean, who else?
Absolutely, yeah. Be a fab guest.
And they say, well, we've not got any strike action on at the moment, blah, blah, blah. And I say, I want to talk about signalling failures.
Okay, yeah.
I want to talk about Hyperloop.
Okay, yeah.
And it's all here. So sorry, Mick. But let's have a cold open.
Let's do it.
Right. Has rail privatisation been a failure? And if so, why?
Yes, it has, absolutely. There's a quick and short answer to that. And then there's a nice long answer. Often people rightly challenge the fact that, well, if privatisation has been such a failure, why have passenger numbers in the UK seemingly grown and grown? To which my response is kind of twofold. The first thing I say is, what's your x-axis doing? Because you need to just extend that back a little bit, because everyone shows the graph from the moment of privatisation and line go up. But if you actually extend the x-axis back to the mid-80s, very much in the midst of BR, British Rail, the state-owned big railway organised kind of organisation, the line had started going up in the mid-80s. When the early 90s recession happened, we'd had 10 years of Thatcher, living standards and people's money people had in their pocket dropped. There was a pretty hefty hit on ridership. And so there's a kind of a deceptive drop in the numbers, but it starts climbing again. But actually, the beginning of the upwards trend started in the mid-80s. It started when BR had kind of basically got itself together, worked out how do you run this modern railway thing, and they'd kind of got it working. So that's the first answer. The second answer is the macro effects far outweigh what we were doing in the railway. There's a bigger world out there, and the reality is that people just had a desire to move around by rail, and that started climbing. And the fun thing to do is to get the...
Why did it start climbing in the mid-80s?
Yeah, so changes increases in kind of living conditions and living standards and the way that incomes worked, shifts in the way that the kind of the types of industries or the lack of heavy industries that were happening in the UK. But even outside of London, rail travel was climbing quite dramatically. Birmingham's a really good example. They had really consistent, very high growth in Birmingham long before privatisation happened. They had the opening of the Cross City Line, and the ridership on that already started climbing. And that was very much a state railway condition, and that was happening across the country. So there's a bigger world out there. It's not that the railways went, we're going to do this thing and suddenly it's going to make ridership climb. Actually, rail managed to double its modal share since the mid-80s up to the mid-2010s because of macro effects of people just changing the way they wanted to travel. People more, the cost of driving, congestion being a downwards pressure on how much people drove. So actually the bigger picture's there. And what you can do, what's quite fun, is get the rail ridership figures for Northern Ireland, which is still nationalised to this day, and compare them to the GB figures, if you like, of the privatised network. And the line pretty much does the same thing, showing that actually the macro effects are far bigger at play than ownership in this situation.
So privatisation isn't responsible for more people using trains, but why was it bad? If the number of people or the share of people using trains is the same in Northern Ireland, where it's publicly owned, and it's the same in GB, where it's privately operated, What difference does it make?
Well, actually, we're reaping the rewards, if you like, of privatization right now, which is that for a while, privatization rode off the back of the fact that we had a railway that had everything turned down to maximum efficiency, minimum fat on the system. And the privatized railway was able to kind of bounce off that for a little while without really putting any additional capacity into the system. And the consequence of that is that right now in the UK, or in GB particularly, we have no more capacity. And our railway network is kind of creaking at the seams. It's getting increasingly expensive to maintain it, to keep running trains, and indeed to try and squeeze any more trains out of the system, because there's no extra capacity, because we haven't really built any new railway. We haven't really expanded capacity. We've done lots of projects, huge amounts of projects. West Coast route modernisation was a major feature of the privatised railway era, which is where we did a huge amount of work on the West Coast main line between Euston and northwards, cost about 30 billion in kind of post-trust pounds. And yet, before that project was even finished, capacity had been absorbed. The demand has far outstripped our rate of capacity growth. And the challenge with having a privatised, and I suppose the more important word is fragmented industry that's unable to kind of talk to itself, to actually coordinate what it needs to do for the future, because all these different bits are competing with each other and kind of struggling to talk to each other, is that we haven't delivered that capacity for the future. We've kind of created this system of various rent seekers all kind of bouncing off each other, but none of them have really had the incentive of grow the railway, primarily because they don't have the ability to deliver that. Only the state does. And so privatisation really acted as a defence mechanism. Back in May 2018, we had an enormous timetable collapse because the privatised system, as a shield for government, couldn't deliver more tracks, couldn't deliver more trains, and therefore could not deliver more railway services at the moment when we had this new timetable that was kind of created and cast, and it fell over in dramatic style, which anyone using London Bridge will have noticed. So anyone kind of going through that part of London will have noticed. Anyone in the north of England will have noticed in a big way. And in fact, across the whole country, a third of services stopped working, stopped running, because we just reached a point of everything kind of collapsed in on itself. And we can go, in fact, we will get into the weeds of exactly why that ended up happening and sort of some of the key players as to why. But essentially, having such a fragmented industry means that you just cannot, the industry cannot understand what it needs to be doing, and therefore it cannot move forwards. It cannot deliver capacity, essentially.
So fragmentation rather than privatisation is the watchword.
Yep.
You've said something interesting there, which is that capacity hasn't kept up with demand, and that's an inversion of what you would normally hear, which is we don't need to build more capacity because there isn't the demand. If I talk about a high-speed rail link between Worthing and Brighton or something, people would say that's just pointless. People drive, it's quite a short journey. Obviously, I mean, I'm using a stupid example because they're quite close to each other. But you get my point.
Absolutely, yeah. My response to that is always, you do not measure the need to build a bridge by how many people swim across a river, right? So, like, one of the key things we found when we do open new railway projects, Crossrail is a good example, but even some of the rural projects we've had, such as the Borders Railway that was opened in Scotland between Edinburgh and Tweedbank, that demand massively outstrips the predictions. So the actual ridership, when this railway is open, running, as we've seen with Crossrail, as we see with essentially every major railway project that opens a new line or enhances capacity, is that rapidly people flood to that railway, and all the predictions are hugely basically ineffective compared to the volume of people who go by train, who move by train, and that's a consistent pattern. And so this is why we need to think not about, well, how do we change, how do we slightly tweak existing patterns of mobility? How do we actually, what we need to be doing is thinking about what does mobility need to look like for us to deliver our kind of societal objectives in 50 or even 100 years. So how are we going to deliver mobility, and what is that mobility going to look like? And then how do the railways fit into that picture? So that's a much cleaner and frankly more visionary and actually effective and less wasteful way of thinking about the future of mobility. But I'm sure we'll get into the fun of that shortly.
How would you, if that's the case, then if you can't determine future demand, how would you determine what project to build and what project not to build? So let's say I've got a limited pot of money.
Yep.
Sadly, that is life, the scarce amount of resource, even if you direct more investment towards public transport. And I say, well, we should either build a high-speed rail connecting Edinburgh and Glasgow or Manchester and Liverpool. You're saying that actually we can't have any idea about the kind of demand that would be...
No, not exactly. So what I'm saying is that at the moment we kind of using a very incremental approach to. So we go, well, at the moment this many people travel by train there, and if we do this project, we'll increase the ridership by 11% or something over this period, or we'll increase ridership by a certain amount. What we need to be doing is build build the mobility system that we want to see. So if we understand that currently along with a given corridor, along the M6 corridor between Manchester and Glasgow, right, we know that at the moment, pick an even better option, the A66 that crosses the Pennines. There's a big discussion about dualling that road, and Barnard Castle is a fun place that everyone knows about thanks to Dominic Cummings. So the A66, right, no railway along there anymore. We know that current mobility patterns, that's a hugely busy route for HGVs, so for goods traffic moving up to Scotland from the northeast of England, very, very busy, huge amount of long-distance car traffic. Actually, what we need to do is, we know for net zero that we have to reduce overall car usage by 10-20% by 2050, kind of at the latest. Well, in which case, we need a railway that will saturate some of that current mobility that's served by road. So it's not so much that we can't predict, we can predict. But the issue is that at the moment, our processes we use to determine, basically our business case development processes, are hopelessly underestimating rail usage, just as they are much more oriented towards favouring road projects. And so that's a challenge. And it's also a challenge because even just using the measurement tools we have to justify projects, which is basically time saved by people choosing one mode over another, is hopelessly inadequate for rail because it ignores all the other useful externalities like reducing congestion on the roads or reducing pollution or creating a more high-tech economy that builds things like trains or electrification equipment. So all those externalities are just ignored by these processes, and we can't even predict the simple number of how many passengers will use this new railway, as we've seen with Crossrail, which has massively outstripped any predictions about its usage. 1 in 6 passengers right now using railways in Britain is on Crossrail. It's just absolutely spectacular. It's on the
so I've heard, I post about that number, and then some people have got in touch and they say it's not actually accurate. So Where does that come from? What makes Crossrail, because then they say, well, actually Victoria can carry more people. The Victoria line can carry more people. So why is Crossrail a rail line, but say, the Jubilee or Victoria line isn't on the underground?
Yeah, that's because I actually touch on this in the book for weird accounting reasons. There's no engineering or technical difference between Crossrail and other tube lines. They're all railway, just as a tram on a street is a railway.
So same gauge, everything.
It's the gauge are the same. So the loading gauge is different. So you couldn't fit a Crossrail train onto the Victoria line. You'd make a hell of a mess. But the point is that it's still a railway. It's steel on steel. It's exploiting all the benefits, all of the energy efficiency benefits that railways give us. It just happens to be that we've, rather than going, well, let's build a little toothpaste tube thing like we did 150 years ago, let's build a thing to modern standards. And it's a good job we did, because if we hadn't, we'd be a little bit embarrassed about how full and uncomfortable that experience would be, even though actually a lot of people are quite uncomfortable in the Elizabeth line because it's already full. It's already like sardines at peak time. So they've ordered new additional trains because it's so popular as a way of moving people. So yeah, the Crossrail, the 1 in 6 thing is it is like 1 in 6 passengers. We could get into data collection in another podcast in 20 years when you've run out of all the other cool people to talk to. But data collection is quite important, and the way we do it on the railways is like really outdated. And one of the challenges of data collection is that the data can be messy. But yeah, we're not looking at TfL numbers because for whatever reason we've decided to categorize those in their own sort of separate pot. But yeah, underground they're just railways. They're just railways, but underground.
So what's the calculation? How does it work in terms of what we're going to build? You're saying that some stuff isn't internalized with regards to the benefits.
So basically, you get an engineering actually before even engineering consultancy gets near it, you get a kind of a pure consultancy that goes, oh well, we reckon we could justify this level of demand, and that might well, and the demand comes from a series of quite outdated calculations that say, well, this many people live here and this many people currently drive, and we might be able to, and this many people could take the train based on some pretty primitive calculations. And it's based more on what's the current mobility and what might we assume we could drive some shift from car to rail if we build this new railway line. But again, the key thing is that the calculations are the whole process of developing those business cases was developed for roads in the kind of the latter half of the previous century. It's not really, we don't really have a dedicated public transport system for developing those numbers. Interestingly, a new process was being developed by the subnational transport body Transport for the North as part of kind of developing new appraisal approaches. But a couple of years ago, that that capacity was sort of cut by central government from Transport for the North. So
who cut it?
So that was cut by the previous administration in the aftermath of a government report called the Integrated Rail Plan that basically began the process of cutting HS2 to the bone. But Transport for the North went, wait a minute, you've just denied us all the things you promised about Transpennine high speed and about Yorkshire getting high speed too. We don't like that. And then central government went, okay, we'll cut your budget by 50% then, TfN. How do you like that? And so all that capacity went out the window to develop these new approaches, which is extremely frustrating.
That sums up quite a lot. So you've got somebody trying to create a new, effectively a calculating mechanism to determine how value is created by trains. And then even that's cut.
Yeah. Well, let's take another example of something that was cut. A lot of people say, well, why don't we have like contactless ticketing systems in the north of England, right? You know, people are so familiar with Oyster Card and with the contactless system that overlays it. It's such it just naturally makes it a much easier process to go, I'm going to get the train. I don't have to worry about what ticket it is because I know that when I tap in and tap out, it'll basically be the cheapest option that I have available, right? And Transport for the North, again, this subnational transport body that was created by George Osborne, but it actually is quite a good thing as having this kind of devolved authority that's closest to people who actually use the system. They were like, okay, well, we're going to develop a kind of a zonal ticketing system for kind of our area, our region, so covering like Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and beyond. This kind of huge kind of urban area that could potentially rival London if it was allowed to. And they went, right, we'll develop our own sort of smart ticketing system. And they'd spent tens of millions of quid on going through this process of developing the system, and central government cut the funding, and that project died a death, and that was the end of that. And then, funnily enough, 6 months later, central government announces, oh, we're going to develop our own system of smart ticketing for the north. It's like, well, but you just cut the project that was doing that.
Tens of millions of pounds were wasted. Whose money was that? Where did that money come from?
That's money that was given to Transport for the North from central government. Right. So it's all of our money, but allowing,
but it's not local authorities.
A mixture. So to some extent, local authority, but actually, no. The grant funding to Transport for the North was from central government. There is funding that comes from the local authorities as well, but actually, the ability to cut that money was because central government had kind of given that money in the first place. Of course, my argument, and I make this in the book repeatedly, is that we should not be in a situation where local, massive regions that if you looked anywhere else in Europe would be their own hugely autonomous areas that would raise their own funds and pay their own transport projects. We shouldn't be in a situation where they can have their funding just cut on a whim by central government. It's baffling.
So when was this? People are familiar now with Oyster cards, less relevant than they used to be because of course you can use Apple Pay in your cards and whatnot, but 15 years ago, whenever they were integrated, it was a real 20 years ago, maybe a breakthrough technology, incredibly convenient. You're saying that a large part of the north was developing that, this, multiple city regions combined. When was this?
So this was a few years ago. This was in the aftermath. Actually, it was about 2020, 2021. So
post-COVID.
Post-COVID. Yeah. Post-COVID. Oh, sorry. In the midst of COVID, it was kind of before we were looking at Actually, I think the decision to cancel that was pre-COVID, actually. But it was another situation of, you can do some devolution. Oh, but we don't like that. We don't like you doing that.
So who started it then? It would have been started under...
So this was started under George Osborne, who initiated the kind of the Northern Powerhouse rhetoric and created these... We started seeing this devolution of power away from central government to a very limited extent, no fundraising powers, but some limited statutory power that Transport for the North was kind of at the head of the charge, actually, in its statutory basis, its statutory powers, which was actually quite exciting at the time. It was one of the things that I thought was being done quite well by the coalition government, was actually having some... Again, we're always in a situation where Labour don't do the good thing and the Conservatives do the good thing, even though obviously the politics is seemingly completely reversed between these two parties. Railway investment is a classic example of that. We'll maybe come to that later. But in terms of devolving power away from Westminster, away from central government, actually the coalition government did more of that than we've seen for decades, which was a good thing. But, a couple of administrations later, Brexit happening and under Boris Johnson, there being this feeling of actually, no, we want to centralise power again. We're going to kind of reverse some of this autonomy that we've given the regions. The ticketing scheme was one example of that. And
what was the rationale? I mean,
so the rationale was that...
Hold on. I don't think you'd be able to meet many people in the UK who would say, we shouldn't have an Oyster card system for like a place as large as the Northwest or... Yorkshire.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like you ask anyone in the country, whether they're in London, you ask a Londoner, do you think the North should have like an Oyster card or like contactless ticketing? They go, yeah, it's really good. You ask someone in Brighton, you ask someone in Scotland, and then of course, obviously, people in the North want it. So that is the question: why aren't they allowed to have it? And the trouble is, is that, and I think to some extent it can be whittled down to, we had in later versions of the Conservative government, the Instagram Tories, as they're often called, they loved press releases because they didn't want to do something. They wanted to just have a press release. And this is absolutely true of the current Labour government, as I'm sure we will see over the next 4 years. So the trouble with giving something to another organisation and letting them run with something is that they start being able to do good press releases, like we as this devolved authority have been able to, by the way, led kind of unofficially by Andy Burnham, who's sort of continuing to make a name for himself in, for example, the bus fare cap. He's held it down at £2. He has led the charge on developing this kind of regionally led contactless ticketing system. Well, they can't have that win. We need to have that win. So we're going to announce it as a thing instead. Or that means we need to cancel their project, and we can announce
spending tens
of
millions.
Despite it, having progressed, having employed people, having been progressed so far and spent so many million quid. Yeah, absolutely.
That's honestly what it boils down to, a press release, you think?
I mean, okay, I'm oversimplifying
That's your
here,
view.
I suppose I'm using the Instagram thing as a bit of an analogy for the centralisation of power. This more than any other advanced economy, the UK is hyper-centralised into, well, let's face it, HM Treasury. And Treasury and central government really cannot, they are absolutely allergic to the idea of devolving, dropping power out. And this is a thread that runs through everything that's wrong with kind of our ability to deliver infrastructure, our ability to deliver policy change, our ability to deliver social care, is the centralisation of power within Westminster, even to the point of like TfL London, rather, is an example of very successful devolution, right? And we've seen, particularly in the grant funding in the aftermath. Actually, it was before COVID when the grant was cut to TfL for whatever reason. They cut the grant funding, and TfL had to become self-sufficient. This was under Boris. Well, all of a sudden, TfL did manage to become self-sufficient, and then COVID hit. And then it suddenly was in a bun fight with central government for funding. And we were seeing, projects like Crossrail 2 being cut, extensions, the Bakerloo extension being cut, all these things being cut because central government all of a sudden was like, we've got them again. We've managed to kind of by the back door reverse this devolution. And they were loving it. So this is very much like, I don't want this to seem like a London-centric thing, but even London suffers from the over-centralisation in the UK. So it's not that it's London versus the rest, it's central government versus the rest. And it's a serious problem for the UK, for sure.
It's just quite extraordinary. You have politicians repeatedly saying we want to maximise taxpayer efficiency, we don't want to waste money. And often when you talk about devolution, somebody who's sceptical of devolution says, I don't want any more bureaucracy, I don't want to waste any more money. Actually, you've described something which was the complete opposite. Let's talk about electric vehicles.
Yep.
Obviously, the argument for more people using rail is, for some people, driven by climate change, lower CO2 emissions, etc. You think that we can't just swap diesel or unleaded or leaded vehicles for EVs. Why is that? Why can't we just change every car out there for an EV and then all of a sudden emissions drop? Bob's your uncle.
So the problem that we have right now is that a lot of the problems we have in our society are as a result of the fragmentation of our society, of the isolation of this way that we have built our civilization since the middle of the last century, which is around the ability to move around 2-ton metal boxes. For example, a side effect of that is that we have accepted an epidemic of, in the UK alone, 30,000 people being killed or having life-changing injuries from road collisions, whether those are, and particularly people outside of the car. Actually, that number is increasing, even if safety of people inside the car is getting better. So we're seeing that. So swapping out, a petrol car to an EV, which, by the way, EVs are heavier. There is no evidence there is a positive evidence at best, even with all the modern driving aids that, by the way, are very expensive and only the richest people can afford them in their cars, are going to reduce those deaths and injuries. So that's one thing, is that it is unacceptable that we continue to have that in our society, just accept the deaths of children among thousands of others in the UK alone. And it's worth saying that road collisions are the largest, the single largest source of death globally for young people in the world. It's shocking. It's just absolutely shocking how many people die a year as a result of road collisions. So that's one factor of swapping.
I think in the US it's still about 30,000 a year. I think it's still really high. Yeah.
It's just this is breathtaking, right? It's absolutely breathtaking. So that's one factor is the fact that it's not the way to reduce those numbers is not to have the same or more cars. It's to reduce the number of vehicles on the road. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is the conversation about emissions, even just focusing on emissions, always ignores the carbon costs of building a car. The cars cost a lot of carbon to manufacture, and EVs cost even more carbon to manufacture. So that on emissions alone, you're looking at to swap all the petrol and diesel cars over to EVs once is between 400 and 600 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's the equivalent of 4 years of transport emissions, right? That is the equivalent of about 40 high-speed 2 projects, the carbon that project will emit. So there's a huge amount of carbon just in building these cars, let alone putting them on the road. Another challenge, all of these cars, the largest source of plastics in our atmosphere and in our oceans is car tires. Those car tires.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
The largest
source of plastic in our atmosphere, in our water courses, in our oceans is tire plastic. And that's only going to increase because, again, EVs are heavier. What else? Lithium, cobalt, these mined minerals. These are, let's put it this way, extremely ethically dubious minerals. They are leading a second charge of colonialism at this point. So, for example, cobalt is primarily mined, or a significant amount of the global supply of cobalt comes from child slaves in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That cobalt isn't, you can't bottle off and say, well, we know that's there and we can hide from it. That cobalt finds its way into a massive Chinese conglomerate, and it just is lost in amongst it all, and is in it's in my phone, it's in every single device that has a lithium battery. Apple, Google, Tesla, whatever, and all the car manufacturers, all of them have child slave cobalt in them. All of them do. We can't, we live in a society, we can't avoid that. It's an uncomfortable truth. And we should not be thinking about building a future that maximizes the use of those minerals. Lithium we're not hiding from lithium-ion batteries, but we should be building a society that aims to use it only where it's vital, only where it's necessary. We should be minimizing its use for transport when we know we have better alternatives. So that's another key factor. And another one that's quite interesting that doesn't get talked about enough, we saw the main headline announcement in the recent budget from Rachel Reeves was about potholes, right? Which always makes me wince that we have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, arguably the most powerful politician in the country, more powerful than the PM, is talking about potholes. This is insane. But the reason we're having more and more potholes is not necessarily about council funding being cut. It's because, and I'm not going to say any more of it, but just everyone listening and watching this, Google the fourth power rule, right? So that's the thing you have to go do. We're in a situation where vehicles are getting heavier, and the capacity of the design of roads, even if you spent a lot on a perfect road, their ability to carry these heavy loads, the number of vehicles and the weight of those vehicles is essentially reached its limit. So roads are going to continue to fall to bits on an increasing frequency, not just the road surface, but the bridges, the car parks, all of the different structures that cars travel on. Those are reaching capacity. And we're saying, we're just going to swap all the current vehicles with much heavier vehicles, and that should be fine. So there are countless. I've just given a few things, but these are all painful.
Yeah, let's stick with the heaviness one for a moment. So I mean, obviously, we've had a massive increase in SUVs.
Yep.
They're significantly heavier than the classic 90s hatchback, the Fiat Punto or something.
Get your Novas out.
Yeah. How much heavier is an electric vehicle than a classic, say, unleaded vehicle?
So I will caveat this by saying the best EV is an electric bike, and EVs can be much lighter. But if we're talking about the supposed like-for-like comparisons that the auto manufacturers are pushing, because by the way, it costs them basically the same to build a small hatchback as it does for them to build a big SUV, but they can't charge as much for the small hatchback. So that's the main reason why we're seeing this push to SUVs, is because the auto manufacturers can charge more for them, and therefore they get greater profit. So that's a really important thing to just phrase that with. So the difference between, say, a Ford Focus from 15 years ago that might weigh 1.3 tons to an EV equivalent is it's like between a 50 and in some cases where the auto manufacturer is also just beefing up the vehicle, or indeed say getting rid of the line altogether and just saying, no, we've got rid of that line, now you just have to get an SUV, is between 50 and 100%. So you're talking about cars that could be double the weight. So you could be going from 1.1 to 2.2 tons. You could be seeing a huge difference in the weight of these vehicles if you combine the natural bloating of the vehicle with the fact that some of these lines are just getting cancelled. The Fiesta doesn't exist anymore, right? You can't go out and get a bloody Fiesta. What? You can't. Mondeos don't exist. All these. I don't know why I'm just listing off Fords, but I'm from a Ford family. I loved our big blue Sierra Estate. God, what a vehicle that was. Anyway, I'm getting lost in the weeds. So these vehicles are getting heavier, and it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable simply from having the roads to actually work to be driven over. They are going to continue to disintegrate.
Has any government agency like the Department of Transport, have they actually modelled how much more they're going to have to spend on potholes and road maintenance as a result of cars getting heavier?
Nope, I have not seen a single piece of analysis that looks at that. And it's going to, in the US, where you have huge numbers of multi-story car parks that were built with naff concrete, that's kind of full of scab anti-union officials, hopefully. Those things built knackered old concrete things that we've already had collapses of some of those structures. And they're spread across the US in particular, but plenty of them in the UK, plenty of old NPC car parks spread around in the UK as well. Those structures are not built to cope with the masses of vehicles that we see nowadays. Some of our motorway bridges are, our early motorways that were built between, in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s are built using pre-stressed concrete designs that will not cope with the tonnages of, the annual tonnages of road traffic that we will see if we switch over to EVs. And that's before we talk about the power demand of freight of goods traffic using EVs, which is still not even a viable technology solution yet. So I know I've gone on and on, but I kind of want to paint a picture that I'm not giving the key. There's just like a nebula of challenges with continuing to have a road-oriented kind of form of mobility for our species, for our civilization. We have to think differently. It's not that I'm just saying, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful in a utopia? By the way, it would be. Wouldn't it be a wonderful utopia if we just walked, cycled, took trains, took trams? Wouldn't that be fab? Well, it would be, but actually we can't just keep this. Even if we wanted to stick with the status quo, we physically can't do it. We don't have the space. We don't have the ability. We would not be able to get and maintain the road and run all the vehicles we want to. It doesn't work.
The charging thing is pretty well documented. Yeah. The weight thing is something you hear less of. I mean, you've got Hampshire County Council, which the FT did a great write-up about recently. 84% of their spending, I think, now is going on social care, primarily adult social care, older people.
Yep.
And at the same time, you obviously got people saying, well, like the local council can't look after the roads. And it's a combination of demographic aging and you wanting, that Kia Sportage. I'm afraid that's where we end up. And there's a complete absence of an informed, authoritative media conversation about this stuff and these choices. Maybe we want fewer cars, but the people that really want them, maybe they do want them to be bigger and they want EVs. Fine. We're going to have to spend a hell of a lot more on potholes.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden, and no one's having that conversation. And so that, for example, the Resolution Foundation recently, which does a lot of work on talking about inequality, right? That's kind of their shtick. They published a baffling report recently that said public transport is not the future if we wanted to solve, in terms of solving mobility. It was an absolutely baffling report. You go to the list of acknowledgements and you see that the top lists are all like automotive industry representatives, and I'm like, come on, Resolution Foundation, you do better than this. But the reason I bring this up is because I think a lot of the discussions are quite siloed. So they just purely looked at emissions and inequality. They didn't look at any of those other externalities. I keep using that word, but it's really important that we think about the bigger. I like to say that all these subjects are like a big spider web with lots of mini post-it notes, and you kind of wiggle one and all the others wiggle and jiggle. And picking up the pattern and the relationship between that wiggling is really important to kind of, maybe that's just me describing my ADHD brain, but like these patterns are really important for us understanding, right, what is the right policy mechanism to do? And I talk a lot in the book about ways to just kind of step back and actually think, right, let's just think about what we want to do. What do we want out of mobility? How much do we want people and things to move?
Yeah.
And if you step back and just say, right, that's how much mobility we want. Right, okay, how much of it do we want to deliver? Based on, tonnage on roads versus tonnage on rail. How much of it can we deliver by road versus rail? And the fundamentals of rail versus road are what push me. It's not even that it's just a bias because I love railways or because, I don't even have a job as a rail engineer, and we'll talk about that later. But, it's not that I have a personal bias. It is that there is fundamental physics and science at play that means that you can carry way more mass. A 2-track railway has the ability to carry, in extremis, 70 or 80,000 people per hour per direction. To get that same capacity on a road, you would require 20 or 30 lanes in each direction. A standard kind of 6-lane motorway in the UK carries maybe 4,000 in good conditions. Maybe 6,000 when everything's kind of much more bunched up together. So whereas a railway is carrying 10 times that. It's just so and then think on that for freight, of course, as well, where you have a single HGV with all the complex machinery and tonnage of vehicle and a driver. on a road versus a railway where you have one driver and 80 or 90 lorries worth of equivalent being carried by, and for every mile that you carry, or for every 100 miles that a train carries a ton, the road can only carry it 35 miles for the same energy consumed. So we're talking about a massive energy efficiency benefit by rail. So the fundamentals are kind of what steer us in that direction. So once you understand mobility and what mobility you need to deliver, and then you come back to basics, the answers start becoming reasonably straightforward in terms of, right, okay, that's how we have to deliver. If we want an energy efficient, resource efficient future, and as you said earlier, you could write a blank check tomorrow for the railways and we'd be able to deliver very little more than we currently are, because the limitation on delivery of any infrastructure in the world right now is skilled people. It's humans, it's our ability to deliver stuff. And if you have limited humans and limited time, and if you like a limited carbon budget, then it's really important that we do the most efficient thing to get mobility, to maintain mobility, if we don't want to see enormous inequality and basically rich people travelling more and all the rest of us travelling not at all. So that's why it's so important.
We'll get back to that point about skilled engineers soon, because I find it really interesting, the idea of labour shortages. But just to go back to what you said a moment ago, so you said a 6-lane motorway can basically accommodate the throughput of around 4,000 people an hour, maybe 6,000 if it's really, LA, really squeezing people on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the Victoria line is around 23,000 people an hour?
Oh, it could be, that's how much it carries. But in extremis, the Victoria line can carry over 40,000 passengers per hour per direction.
So the Victoria line can carry 10 times more people per hour than a 6-lane motorway?
Yes. Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's a point that people don't quite grasp. When I talk about railways being awesome, that's kind of what I mean. Like, nothing beats that. Nothing will beat that capacity. And that is an electrified railway. It's a clean railway. It's efficient. It's safe because we have a completely managed system. That's another advantage of railways, is that we've built all these safety systems to make sure they're safe. People go, oh, railways are so expensive. Well, because you get a system that's that much better.
That is crazy. The Victoria line, and also, I mean, because it's not a new line. I didn't realise the throughput on it was so good.
I love that you talk about the Victoria line, because it is also was one of the first essentially driverless systems that we had out there. Because there's a driver in the front of the train, but they just operate the doors. Those are autonomous vehicles. They are running. They're running a grade of automation that is kind of essentially a step down from there being no one on the train.
When was the Victoria line built?
So Victoria line is like, what, 60s? 60s, 70s? Railways are pretty good. We don't let anyone tell you railways aren't innovative. And I know I talk a lot about that.
We'll talk about that. Don't you worry, Gareth. We'll talk about that. That is crazy. So the Victoria line, let's be real, is creating a ton more social value, is way more innovative than anything Elon Musk has done with the Boring Company or Hyperloop. We'll get to that too. But that is incredible, right? I mean, if somebody announced a project like that today, you'd say, wow, that's visionary. But this is 60 years ago. My dad was, walking around in shorts.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll get to this is a fundamental challenge the railways have, is that they've existed for a long time. They've much longer than anyone will tell you about. The railways have been around for centuries. It's not that the railways are a Victorian thing. Railways have existed for hundreds of years in the form that we recognise today. And the trouble with that is that people see them as fiddly and messy. But it's easy to come up with a new thing that says, oh no, we can do better, because it hasn't been tested in the real world. I'm sure we'll get to the acronym that I like to use that describes those challenges in terms of human perception. But it's really important that we understand that railways, those fundamentals of railways, are what make them good. And that's not, when I'm saying railways, I'm including, by the way, things like metros, subways, trams. These are all fantastic solutions. Key message in relation to the technology side, and again, we might pick this up later, is that we've solved the technological questions about transport. We've solved them. We've done it, just like how you move like electricity and water around. We've solved that challenge. The challenges that transport and rail faces are political, not technological. So it's really important that new technologies going, oh, we've got this wonder technology that's going to solve transport. It's like, no, we have already solved transport. So what are you selling me? It's a really, really important challenge that we should bring.
I really like that part of the book where you say, basically getting large numbers of people to travel really quickly, really efficiently. We solved that basically 150 years ago. And it's like, you don't constantly need to find, we don't need to innovate the house.
There's loads of stuff that
we know.
Exactly.
There's a roof.
You put a roof on it.
There's some walls. You have a series of rooms which you do different things in. My favorite example of this is with in the 60s, they were obsessed with this idea that you wouldn't need to eat anymore. You just have a pill, and that would be all. That would be all your food. People, the problem is, people like eating. It's a pleasure, right? It's a fun thing to do.
Paella. No one's going to stop me eating curry. Like exactly. And we solved it.
We'll get back to that as well. This idea of technologism and how transport was consumed by the discourse of technologism. And sometimes you don't need to be innovative. Everybody loves to talk about innovation.
Yeah, but sometimes we
don't need it.
Sometimes we need to talk about implementation. We've done the innovation. We did it hundreds of years ago. It's time for implementation. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, the technological fix isn't necessary. Sometimes it's an organizational fix. Like we're not building enough rail capacity because, like you say, we don't have enough engineers. We need to be training more of them. We don't need to innovate. That's not an innovation. That's about,
do the thing. Do the thing. Train the people, do the thing. It isn't rocket science, and it doesn't need to be. And in a way, it's in our kind of liberal society. Our liberal politicians like to create technocratic smokescreens. There's a lot of it at the moment going, the reason we can't deliver infrastructure in this country is because it's too expensive. No. That's like saying the reason I had heart failure is because my blood pressure was high. So no, the blood pressure, the cost of the infrastructure is a symptom of disease, of illness. And so going, the cost is so high or that we need to wait for the next technology to come along before we invest in transport is a way to do nothing. It's a way to say, well, we have to wait until we've solved these problems. It's like, no, we've solved the problems. We need to get on with doing stuff.
I like the, is it Robert Gordon, the US economist, economic historian? And he's just like, we've not really and this is something Peter Thiel says, which actually is quite interesting, Peter Thiel, because he'll say things which, that's actually correct. He says
the guy you hate to agree with meme, right?
Yeah. And, basically Peter Thiel's assessment of the last 70 years, we're a low innovation society. We had globalization, but we haven't really had technological innovation. And if you look at Robert Gordon, I think, he basically says that our society is built of three inventions. I might be wrong about one of them. Telegraph, steam engine, electrification.
Now, what ties all those together, I wonder?
Well, exactly. We'll talk about that as well. But it's so we're living in the slipstream of these three technologies, which are centuries old, actually, in some cases. Telegraph, century and a half old, let's say. Steam engine is older, but it doesn't really become a mainstream technology until, the late 18th century. Or 250 years, let's say. And actually, in terms of the disruptive power of those technologies, which are a quarter of a millennium old in the case of the steam engine, what Elon Musk is doing isn't actually that impressive. All the internet, it's not actually that impressive. I know we love to feel important and we're changing the world. It's actually not as big a disruption as the telegraph and the steam engine and electrification.
And I have to be really careful to not get into theoretical deep water and just get lost as a really bad leftist. But ultimately, there's our economic system that our entire society is built around incentivizes not innovating.
Yeah.
Which is ironic given that everyone says that capitalism is how we get innovation. It's no, it's the opposite. Capitalism by its very nature, by its very nature, is afraid of change, is afraid of innovation because it might make the pile smaller. So it inherently, and we saw it through COVID, right? The state is actually much more lean. The railway is a perfect example. In no way, private entities could not keep running the railway when no one was traveling on it, whereas the state just pivoted and said, you can't switch the railways off because there are skilled people, there are all these systems that need maintaining, so we're going to just fund it. And even though no one's traveling on it, that's actually fine. We agree that we need to have when we come out the back of this, we still need a railway system. So we're going to fund the thing. Private entities simply, they'd have just folded. That would have been the end of that. Railways would have been gone and our society would have been wrecked as a result because you'd have had to build several 6-lane motorways through London to do the equivalent of the Victoria Line, right? So we can see that the state is far more agile and lean than private capital is. And I talk a lot about, again, I come at this from I suppose what some might call a materialist perspective. I come at this from a leftist theory side of things. I come at it from going mobility, railways, and actually at the end of thinking about how you make mobility better, you end up painting a picture that goes well beyond railways and how we actually build a future that sticks and build a future that is for everyone, that improves quality of life for everyone and that sticks. And I kind of come through that, I suppose, from what you might call a materialist perspective. But the book is not heavy on leftist theory, partly because I'm a bad leftist. And actually, I just know a lot about railways and how they fit into society and make society better. So hopefully the book kind of transcends some of that. But I talk a lot about frontiers of capital and the inability of capital as a result of its desperation to create frontiers, because those frontiers are where it perceives that it creates profit. It cannot. It creates things that are perceived as innovation, but as we see, it's fluff. It's fluff. It's. I think I use the phrase small ideas made to look big is how I describe a lot of what, certainly in the transport sphere, what kind of hyper-capitalism has given us.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about HS2 in a minute. And once I've asked you about HS2, I'm going to talk to you about Hyperloop and Elon Musk. I'm saying this out loud so that I make sure we get there.
We have to talk
So
about
we
Hyperloop.
have to talk about those things. But there's a part of the book where you say that, papers no longer really have transport correspondence, or if they did, their role is massively reduced. Yeah. And actually, the I hate using the word discourse, but it is a discourse.
It is, yeah.
The discourse of transport, like so many other discourses, has been subsumed by technology. And so the prism through which you're looking at all of this stuff is no longer, like you say, engineering, what's needed, and plausible solutions. It's technologism.
And the impact on people as well, because I think it's a really important thing not to lose is the thing about transport writers is often they wrote from the perspective of the traveller, right? Whereas tech people aren't doing that. They're talking about how wonderful it'll be to have your whiz gig. But a common theme I find in the tech journalist thing is that the tech journalists are talking about the tech, whereas transport journalists talked about the experience of the traveller. They weren't talking about it in a nuts and bolts. They were going, well, people experience this. People have experienced this as bad, I think that's a really important thing to pick up on and a key difference.
And that has real implications because we saw this in 2016, 2017, just a deluge of newspaper articles about Hyperloop, which, by the way, as you explain in the book, and we will talk about it more, it literally cannot work as a solution for mass transit. But that ideology of technologism meant that, well, it's a tech story, we have to talk about it. I mean, I saw this 15 years ago when I was involved in protests and whatnot. You would see magazines like The Economist or papers like the FT, they say, oh, we'll cover this story about protest. They're using iPhones. So they weren't interested. They weren't interested in the protest or the demands or even maybe some of the ideological innovation that was happening or the radicalization. They're doing it on smartphones. And that is so much contemporary journalism now. Yeah. We care because of the technology hook. HS2.
Yeah.
Why do we need it? Why is it a good idea?
So, key problem with Britain's railways is that they're a jack of all trades and a master of none. We'll get on to different national railway systems. We have, for various reasons in the UK, decided that we're going to have one of the most intensively used railways in the world, a mixed traffic intensively used railway. And that is a case of diminishing returns when you have this enormous demand that we've talked about of people wanting to travel by train, over the need to carry more freight, more of our treats by train. And so when you have a mixed traffic railway, what I'm talking about is a railway that's carrying local services, freight services, so services that stop at all stations, services that kind of skip some. And then the kind of key problem service type is the trains that go long distances between, say, London and York, the one that I've used today, that literally goes non-stop from London to York through a load of stations that other trains have to get out of the way for, so this thing can keep going 125 miles an hour. Now, what that means...
So there's no stops on that service.
If you get the right train, it's non-stop to York.
Wow.
Which is great, because it means I get an hour and a quarter, hour and three-quarter service from London King's Cross up to York, which is fab. But it's at the expense of... bear in mind, this is a major mainline railway, but it's still two-track for a lot of its length. And trains can't... They can't jump each other. So you have a situation where the train ahead has to be a certain distance ahead to allow the fast train to not catch it up. So on a mixed traffic rail, and this is true not just of the East Coast Main Line, but it's true in suburban areas where you have the approaches to Birmingham or Manchester or Leeds, where you've got the local stopping train, like the Northern service, say, on the way through Leeds, that stops at every station, like Crossgates and Micklefield and whatever. And then you've got the TransPennine Express service that's going from York to Leeds, but it also can't catch up the stopping train, which means that you have to leave big gaps in the timetable. So you have two tracks of railway, all the fixed costs of maintaining this incredibly valuable system, but we're not making best use of it because we've got to leave huge gaps when there are just no trains so that the fast train doesn't catch up the slow train. How do you solve that problem? Well, actually, we tried to solve that problem by upgrading the existing railway with a project that was called the West Coast Route Modernisation, and it was a contributor to sinking a major part of the original privatised transport privatised rail structure. That was the West Coast Route Modernisation, electrifying, four-tracking, all this stuff, massive upgrade of the existing railway line, but still mixed traffic. 30 billion quid before the last contracts were signed off. Every ounce of capacity had been absorbed that they had created. So the project had not even finished, and all its benefits had been absorbed, used up. We realised in the late 2000s...
When was this?
So that was in the mid to late 2000s.
Right.
We realised during that project that the only solution was actually building a new railway line that takes those long distance services, yeets them off the existing network, dumps them onto their own dedicated line, which means that not only That's then a side effect. So the main benefit of HS2 is not actually the fast trains, although they're a useful side effect. It's the fact that you get an enormous leap in capacity on the existing railway, because you can bunch all those trains up much more closely together because they haven't got 125 mile an hour high-speed train chasing them up the ass. So you can squeeze all these things together. You get much more capacity out of the existing asset. And it's the existing railway that goes for all the places we live. You know, the thing about a new railway is that in order to get it to serve all the places you live, you have to do a cross rail, which is put the thing underground at enormous expense. Whereas a high-speed line that doesn't have any intermediate stations, you can shove it out in the countryside where there's not much going on, where it doesn't cost a huge amount. We'll get onto costs in a minute, I know. But that allows us to then get a much better existing railway. So HS2's main benefit is not on HS2 at all. It's about releasing capacity on the West Coast Main Line, on the East Coast Main Line as well, and on the Midland Main Line, and kind of on all the other lines that intersect. So pretty much every station in the country, kind of from London north to HS2's limits, well, now Birmingham, so we'll get there as well. But originally, in its original form, it would have had huge benefits right way as far north as Manchester, and indeed up to Wigan even. Huge benefits on the existing network for more space, for more trains.
So there's more capacity rather than
exactly.
Saving 20 minutes between Birmingham
The 20
and
minutes
London.
thing was a gimmick nonsense, but partly...
Hey, I like it. I like fast trains.
But it is a useful... That is not a thing to be ignored, right? That is a useful benefit, not necessarily for the person who's just travelling from London to Manchester, say, but for the fact that it means that if you live in a suburb of Manchester and you're travelling, say, to somewhere in the southwest or somewhere in the East Midlands or whatever, and it means that the core of your journey, if that core is quicker, it means your overall journey is quicker, because the fiddly bits at each end, it doesn't matter so much if they take a bit longer if you're kind of between the two main stations in the blink of an eye. That's also really important. It often gets lost. People often talk about just the main stations. But mobility is about people in some smaller place going to some other smaller place. And actually having a fast core is important in facilitating maximum mobility in that sense too. But anyway, that's getting into the weeds. So HS2... key message, it's about the existing railway network. It's not about the fast trains. They're a useful side effect. It's about maximising suburban capacity, maximising freight capacity on our railway.
Why was it so bad at communicating this? Because literally everybody, until about 2018, thought it was about...
So do you know why in 2018 it changed tack? Do you know who got involved and told them and their board level staff to change the messaging? It was me. Yeah. Because they had not had this message. And the reason that they were selling it short is because we had a privatised railway system that government couldn't be seen to be meddling in. Because if government starts going, HS2 will release a load of capacity for us to have a much more dense timetable,
right,
it would look like they were controlling all the levers of power for their supposed privatised system. So the curtain would fall to one side.
It was an outgrowth of the ideology, effectively.
Exactly. And the other thing is, if you sell it too well to the public, it becomes difficult for Treasury to have an off-ramp. Treasury like to be able to abandon big projects, and if the people, us lot, thought that HS2 was, if we really thought that it was a good idea, there's a risk that Treasury might not be able to easily politically cancel it. So it was always important for them with this big project to ensure that it was very unpopular, so that they could very easasily just cancel it.
Do you really believe that?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I do believe
crazy.
That.
We're talking about a project which was initially being budgeted for, what, 60 billion?
Yeah, 60 was the original sensible budget.
And they were like, we don't want it to be too popular because, we might have to do it.
We want to be able to cancel it because we hate committing to anything. Yeah, absolutely. I vigorously believe, and I use the hashtag abolish the Treasury all the time. Treasury are one of the major problems in our country.
So who's pushing? You're saying the Treasury. So who pushes that? The mandarins, or is it the elected politicians?
Well, it's an institutional rot, if you like. So, and we'll get to this when we talk about why costs for delivering infrastructure are so high in the UK. But it's kind of an institutional rot of like, well, if we commit, firstly, the timescales on which Treasury measures whether something is worthwhile is 5 years ahead, which is, if you plot out a nice net present value graph of any infrastructure project, the benefits don't come instantly. They come after patterns have changed and behaviors have changed, and after maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So if you're only measuring 5 years ahead, then you've only got the disbenefits of the capital investment, and you don't have any of the returns of the operational benefit, the societal benefit. So that, number one, is that Treasury's wired that way, but also Treasury's wired to be deep, and you see mandarins talking about this, they're wired to be deeply afraid of invest now, benefit later solutions, which again, for a body that is ostensibly in charge of the vision of what the future should look like for British people in this country, that's bonkers.
Where does it come from? That's one thing. Any successful business, and again, that's not a political point. There could be somebody who's a Tory voting business person. They say we're going to invest in capacity because we can see the rate of return. It's in the long term interest of this business. It'll be we're putting money aside today because over 5, 10, 15 years, it's in our interest. Why is the Treasury incapable of doing that?
So it's afraid of scaring bond markets. It's got into this bizarre situation. We saw it with the Reeves budget, where we treat the economy, capital T, capital E, as our god. Today's monotheism is the economy, right? In most of the world, we treat it as a god, and so anything that risks upsetting bond markets, so that means like things like investing, scaring them by saying, "Oh no, we're going to invest a lot. We're going to put a lot of bonds into market." Potential scaring bond markets in that sense of investing. Ultimately, the debt to GDP ratio. Being afraid of all of these. Essentially, rules that we have created ourselves anyway.
But that went up anyway. I mean, that's the
exactly.
It's not like that's been going down. That's gone up anyway.
And the irony, of course, is that even by its own merits, the trepidation and the lack of ambition in the last budget, the lack of actual material investment that will benefit us, benefit actual real human people rather than like the company bosses, means that we're going to have a situation like they've had in the US, where you've had all these policies that reduce inflation, that basically reduce inflation by making GDP look like it's getting better, but actually individual people on the ground have worse living conditions.
Just about Bidenomics kind of agenda.
Exactly. The trouble with that is that it's give private companies lots of money rather than invest in things that people actually will benefit from, like public transport. So even by its own measures, the don't want to freak out the bond market situation doesn't make sense, because actually the bond markets want a stable investment platform. They want to see a country that will continue to exist in 20 or 30 years. So surely even they would actually not be spooked by going, you know what, we're going to have better infrastructure in 20 or 30 years. And that means that you'll have a more stable economy. And that means you'll get a more stable return on your investment, because people who, bond markets want stability. They don't want disruption. They want stability because they get their nice stable return. And yet we have a government afraid of investing. And that is cultural. There's a whole podcast, and frankly, people more intelligent than I am on who could talk about the reasons for that, and relationships with PFI, and the sort of the relationship with the way that we changed how we measure in fact, the relationship with financialization. Grace, in fact, could talk unendingly about financialization and the way that rot has seeped into Treasury. And I think that is, again, I'm wibbling my big spider web with post-it notes on it. They all interrelate, but it's really important to understand that it's centralization of power. It comes back to the centralization of power. And if you have power too far away from the people who the decisions impact on, then they're going to feel disenfranchised. And transport is the perfect subject matter for that, because you've got central government making people's bus fares go up by 50%, right?
We'll go back to trains in a moment. But given we're talking about the Treasury, there's an amazing anecdote of somebody I know who worked for the Treasury as an economist there. Younger person, they've now left. I won't use their actual name. Let's give them because he was rather posh. Let's give him a quasi-posh name. I hope I don't insult people out there with this name. I was going to say Arthur.
Oh, okay, right.
I quite like Arthur. Tarquin's a cliche. Let's use Tarquin. But isn't that more of a lib thing? Anyway, he was like classically posh. Arthur. And then one day, this is years ago now, and I really want to talk about this because I don't think many people watching, listening, understand how stupid some of the most powerful people in this country actually are. They're having a conversation, they're talking about the housing crisis, and they're saying, young people can't get on the housing ladder. This is a very, very senior civil servant. And then he sort of does a shout out with a small team there, and he goes, well, I don't think that's quite right. I mean, everybody here can afford a home, can't they? Arthur, you're a homeowner, aren't you? He goes, well, I'm not actually, I rent. Fuck a duck. Oh, okay. And that's still a big part of the civil service. And I know on the left you're not meant to bash the civil service. You're meant to say, oh no, they should have everything.
Oh boy, no, I cannot. Yeah.
Well, no. There's sometimes when I saw Gove and Boris Johnson slag off civil servants, I said, well, it's not entirely wrong. I mean, I dislike them for different.
Entrenched institution, of course, is full of people who are from a very public schooly background. Yeah. We haven't broken out of that yet, and we won't for a long time. Absolutely.
Yeah. So and those are the people, like you say, I wouldn't trust them to walk my dog, frankly. But we've talked there about HS2, and I think this is really key, which is that I think one of probably the major difference now between somewhere like Britain, most of Europe, but Britain has it in particular, and China, is that in China, the vision of the future, the vision of the nation and the national interest is antecedent to the economics.
Yeah.
Right. And we see that with Xi Jinping. So like they've basically made a decision. We're going to do X, Y, Z, grow certain sectors of the economy. We're going to try and reduce rural poverty. we're going to take a hit to GDP, like a couple of percent per year. That's the calculation we're making. And then in this country, it's just that is implausible. Right?
China has not made the economy God. They've gone, we want to build this. This is the society we want to build. And if the society functions right, the economy is merely a word to describe measuring the success of the society, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the UK and in the Anglosphere and in basically most of the world, frankly, outside of India and China, we've gone, no, the economy is the God. Everything else we have to screw everything else just gets screwed around to make sure the economy, that God, is appeased, that we've made the right sacrifices to that God. Whereas that's not my analogy, by the way. I'm aping that from other very skilled, talented podcasters who I'm sure people will be able to find elsewhere. But like the economy as God, whereas they don't do that in China. They've gone, this is the society we reckon we need to be building. Yeah. And they change, they sometimes move around. It's not like it's a fixed set thing. The technology's changed, they change their mind. But they've gone, that's the society we want to build. And if we get that right, then the economy will just kind of come in behind and whatever. The economy is just a word to describe us measuring what that society looks like. And we've just totally lost track of that.
I can't remember the person who was in charge. Basically, it was the Mandarin in charge of Hong Kong when it was, under British government. I can't remember his name. He was a anarcho-liberal, market capitalist, crazy wacko. But anyway, he was asked, what's the first thing you would like to do? And he said it would be, I'd like to abolish the statistics agency. He said, and it's kind of there's a part of me, I'm like, he's like, I don't want to measure GDP. Just do the stuff that I want, right? Which is I want to reduce taxes, I want to reduce bureaucracy, let people do what they want. And I think that's kind of like a left-wing version of that.
GDP is bad. Like index of human happiness, actually that's not the exact term, but there is a specific term measured of like human joy and happiness. That is a far more effective measure of economic health. Because actually that will measure equity, which... I don't want to go Professor Kate Raworth, like talking about economics as equity and the importance of having an equitable society, a fairer society is a more opulent, frankly, a healthier society in terms of the populism and authoritarianism as well. Yeah, that's what. And I talk about that in the book a lot. I'm not going to get into the weeds of it. And I'm conscious we talked about a million things, and we haven't even got to Hyperloop yet. So
no, we will get to Hyperloop.
We should focus on. It is frustrating that we get obsessed with, certainly, I'll use economy as a god and forgetting, we should be setting out what society we want to have and build that society and shape our institutions around delivering that society, not delivering the number, delivering the line go up.
So quickly, you just a few moments ago criticised the Reeves budget, the recent Rachel Reeves budget.
Yeah.
What was wrong with it? Because obviously there is actually a significant amount more going towards capital expenditure than was previously the case. So why is that not good?
Well, have a look at where there's some capital expenditure, limited capital expenditure going to NHS, some going to education so that, we get rid of the aero concrete. There is limited capital expenditure, but not enough. But unfortunately, a lot of the capital expenditure is into is some of that flood-in investment type capital, which is stuff that, frankly, people don't see. They don't see the benefits of it. The advantage of transport infrastructure investment is that it could not be more visible. It could not be more present in people's lives. And again, we come back to the Bidenomics situation, although admittedly, Biden, for all of his extreme faults, Amtrak Joe was a train guy, right? And admittedly, they didn't do much in the way of building any trains while he was president. He still is president at time of recording. He hasn't fallen over yet. He did, in theory, push forwards a lot of major capital, major sort of programs of building railways. At least those are visible. But for the most part, that investment, the Bidenomics stuff, the all of the acts that kind of came in there were about kind of reinforcing private capital and that way, make the line go up that way. And we've seen similar with the budget from Reeves. And nothing more true of that than looking at transport and going, this budget had not a single rail project in it. There was nothing for rail. The projects that were talked about...
Well, they're going to Euston now.
No. They're building a tunnel to the giant puddle where Euston Station might be in the future. But they haven't committed to Euston Station being built. They've merely committed to providing passive provision for maybe in the future we might go to Euston. And that was what the previous government had already kind of done because the people building HS2 hadn't stopped building the tunnel. So they'd kind of been cornered into that decision. So that's not an announcement. That's not any actual new money. And the stuff
do you think they will build Euston Station?
This government won't.
This government won't?
This particular electoral cycle, I don't think they'll commit to it. They'll continue batting the ball down the road. Honestly, I would love them to say yes. I want to be proven wrong on that so much. Please prove me wrong on it. But they while Lend-Lease, as a big oversight developer, sort of money-making private developer, kind of sits as the main stakeholder on that project, and they cannot agree what the station should look like. And while government continues to go, no, we need private sector investment to pay for the railway station, it will simply not happen, because private sector will never pay for a massive railway station that's as complex as Euston. And at the moment, Treasury are not interested in paying for it either. So at the moment, we're at stalemate, and it's going to continue not being built. So we're going to have tunnels that lead to a giant puddle, and you can't get on a train from a puddle. Not
so the de facto London station will be
Old Common. Baffling, isn't it?
You think when this thing opens up, it's going to go to
yeah. And this is Euston is an episode in of itself. Euston is a mess because Crossrail 2 was cancelled, and Crossrail 2 was doing most of the really complicated underground stuff, because you cannot build the HS2 station without dealing with the fact that the underground stations are severely limited in capacity to the point of being dangerous. Euston and safety is I need to be careful at what I say here, otherwise the current rail minister will come after me with an axe. But the Euston is already severely congested, as is the existing station is severely congested. So you have to deal with the underground stuff. Crossrail 2 was going to do that, which is a couple of billion quid's worth of capital investment.
How much would Crossrail 2 have cost?
Crossrail 2 overall is what
Crossrail 1 was like 10 billion.
Yeah, right? No, 25 billion.
25 billion. Okay.
Crossrail 2 I think was more like 35, 40 billion. And the complex, let's call it, at Euston was, I think, in the region of about £1 billion worth of infrastructure just for the underground stuff. Cancel Crossrail 2, and that then goes into the HS2 budget, which is no wonder why the HS2 station budget ballooned by £2 billion quidish. So that's no coincidence. As one of the reasons why the Euston budget has escalated so much is because of a lack of that systemic thinking.
Right. Of all the projects out there in the UK, so obviously you would like to see HS2 go to Manchester, etc., I presume.
Yeah.
But then I say, like, Gareth, I'm a genie, and you can build 3 train lines, 3 high-speed connections, or it can be Crossrail 2 or whatever. What would they be, and in what order?
Yeah, well, build HS2 in its entirety, including up to Yorkshire and beyond, because nothing gives you more. I talked about the mixed traffic problem. Nothing, no project gives you more bang for its buck than HS2. Frankly, no matter what it costs, because as HS2's costs increase, so too would any alternative that would deliver nominally the same thing. So HS2 absolutely delivered up to Yorkshire, up to Manchester, and of course linking onto the West Coast Main Line.
That doesn't count. Come on, 3 more. I want a curveball.
Oh, so we need a high-speed line across the Pennines from Liverpool through Manchester, Bradford, into Leeds, and connecting beyond. That's another absolutely critical project. That's vital to make that investment. And then what the third one might be? Well, actually, there's a lot to be said for the economic value of linking London towards the southwest with a new high-speed line. Equally, I think there is a lot to be said for linking Birmingham down to the southwest as well. So kind of creating what was a Y of HS2, turning it into a bit of an X shape. There you are. You happy, Elon? Turning it into an X, and he loves X, doesn't he? He's obsessed with it. So you have that X shape that with then the TransPennine link that would achieve. It basically would mean that you could put most of the long distance trains onto their own network, and essentially that's what unlocks the massive capacity release. So if you're achieving
Birmingham to where? What, Exeter?
Birmingham to not even as far as Exeter, but certainly Birmingham to Cardiff and Bristol. So kind of creating that.
That's quite
section.
short.
So not necessarily a huge amount, yeah, but that would achieve a significant amount of capacity release. If you then ran it down to Exeter as well, terrific. You'd get a lot of journey time benefit. But I think the really important bit to do is to actually provide the capacity relief through Birmingham that you get from taking the long distance. The trains that are currently cross-country trains that run kind of diagonally from like the northeast down to like Reading or to Bristol and beyond, get those onto their own network. So you free up a huge amount of capacity kind of in that southwest area, southwest of Birmingham. That's a tremendous kind of growth area for kind of housing and things that's stifled by the mixed traffic railway that we currently have.
So I live in Hampshire.
Yep.
I live in Portsmouth. My nearest station is Fratton. To get from Fratton to London Waterloo on a good train is about 1 hour 25, 1 hour 30, let's say. Without building a new track, let's say there's new tracks elsewhere, etc., but they upgrade signalling, blah, 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 blah. How quick could that train be?
Not much quicker for a couple of reasons. We haven't been nerdy enough in this podcast, right? We've been very esoteric, let's talk about Third Rail. So one of the reasons is that you have that bit of railway is powered by Third Rail, which is a giant chunky rail down at the big fizzy rail. If you step on it, blows a hole in your foot. So that's carrying 750 volts of DC, and trains that use that type of traction technology, so they have a shoe that runs along it picking up electricity, can only run so fast. You can only get them to run so fast. They're limited to 75 miles an hour, and sometimes they beat the speed and go up to 90.
How old is it?
Well, as a technology, that's pretty old. That's like, early 1900s. It's very, very old tech. But to be fair, so is overhead electrification. So the age doesn't matter too much. But the limitation on speed is a key thing. With overhead electrification, you can run much faster. You can run up to 125 on our network, and faster still, obviously, elsewhere, because all the fast railways are run by overhead electrification. So that's one factor. But the other factor is that the only way you could run trains faster is by getting rid of the inner London commuter services. And that would make a lot of people very unhappy. So if you're using the existing railway to get trains from like Hampshire conurbation into London quicker, then what you need to do is sacrifice all the local stopping trains that get in the way. And obviously that's not good, because those are the ones that actually carry a lot of the people into, in and out of London or elsewhere. So that's, again, it's a really good example of the mixed traffic problem. And one of the new railway lines that I think ought to be built is actually connecting London down to Hampshire, down to the Hampshire conurbation, down to Portsmouth, Southampton, and then following that route down to the southwest.
Nobody talks
it's
about it.
It's a huge conurbation that people ignore. It's also, by the way, one of the main freight connections from Britain to the rest of the world. Southampton Port is one of the major intermodal connections to the rest of the world, and it carries an enormous amount of rail freight as a result. And that railway is not electrified and is way off capacity. Don't get us started on the single track railway that connects Folkestone as the other major port. So that's a whole, again, the book covers some of this. It's a huge nebulous subject.
So okay, we could talk about a new rail connection between Southampton, Portsmouth, South Hampshire conurbation, which, like I said, is more than 1 million people. It's really, really big. It's more than Liverpool, actually. Greater Liverpool region, I think.
It's huge, and it has nothing. No mass transit at all. Not even a suburban railway system.
No
it's
tram.
Rubbish. It's just rubbish. It's
actually extraordinary.
Huge city. In any rational place, a city of over 1 million people shouldn't just have trams. It should have a metro system.
It's not a city. I mean, if you tell somebody from Southampton they're in a city with Portsmouth, they get rather upset.
True.
But metro area.
Let's call it a metro area, yeah. Although that is a city, folks. Yeah, it is a metro area of more than 1 million people in mainland continental Europe. That would be extremely likely to have a metro system. So I don't mean like a tram. I mean like an actual, you go down under the ground and get on a train that looks like a tube train, and it goes to, that's 1 million people. It should have a transport system that rigorous, that substantial.
So, and there's a few of those, aren't there? So you've got Brighton, Worthing, and Hove is about 800,000, I think. You've got Bournemouth, Poole, Christchurch, which is 500,000. And because these aren't in the north, our conversation, because everything's so London centric. Well, if it's not in London and it's a city, it must be in the north. There's other places as well.
Well, the East Midlands is a good example of a place that gets severely forgotten, right? Yeah. East Midlands. It's got quite a disparate population between Leicester, Nottingham, and Derby, but actually collectively the population of the East Midlands is huge, and it also happens to be one of our major if not the major manufacturing hub, particularly when you kind of scoop in the top part of South Yorkshire. Huge amount of manufacturing, and kind of the last of the medium and heavy manufacturing in the UK happens in that area, and yet its transport links are crap. Internally as well as south facing.
Well, like Cardiff City region, you've got Newport, etc. Again, you're looking at more than 1 million people, and it doesn't have a mayor. It doesn't have particularly good public transport, just exceptionally poor when you compare it to other places. Let's talk about Hyperloop.
Let's do it.
Why isn't it a good idea? Or why isn't it even, you don't even think it's possible? Why?
No. So
stop this Elon hate.
Yeah, well, no, unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. So it's that word again, capacity. I've talked about capacity a lot, but ultimately, transport is about how many people or things you move given the resources you've allocated to that task. The challenge with Hyperloop is that we're talking about pods. Pods, by the way, if you just swap out the word car for pod, it often explains it kind of gets through a lot of the bullshit. But we're talking about pods that maybe carry 20, 30 people. They're traveling at, let's call it 1,000 kilometers an hour. Now, the challenge with that is that in one tube, the distance you can have between those so that if a problem occurs, they can safely stop is maybe 35 to 40 seconds. So if you're running 40-second headways between those little pods carrying 20 people, that means that the system capacity, so how many passengers per hour per direction this thing can carry, is like 2,000 or maybe 3,000, which is, as we've already discussed, quite small compared to rail. In fact, it's vanishingly small. The infrastructure requirements, meanwhile, of building a straight line, because the speeds require a straight line, the economics of this thing, all the tech bro weirdos who've come up with this stuff, the guys with the big scarves and whatever, the people with names like Bebop Gresta, name alert, those guys have not envisaged any world where they're tunneling underground because their economics don't work, because the economic case they've built is based around knitting some smoke around air rights. And so they're all above ground. Now, where in the world are you pummeling a straight line through any city of 2 tubes next to each other, let alone, if you want the capacity of HS2, 16 next to each other? Where in the world are you bulldozing that kind of dystopian? It's like something like Blade Runner, you just barrel this, not even in the Saudi desert. Well, okay, the line, that's a whole other story. But like very few places in the world where you could rationally barrel 16 3-meter diameter tubes on stilts. And also, as soon as you start putting that in the renders, rather than the nice little slender little tube, as soon as you put that in the renders, suddenly people are like, oh, that's mental. That's mental. So it's just as simple as that. These things have absolutely no capacity. They have the equivalent capacity of business jets, but for a substantially increased infrastructure requirement. So it's just laughable that we've got anywhere. And I hopefully you enjoyed that chapter in the book, because I had a lot of fun writing it, because it kind of captured a lot of my... It's funny, because when I started fighting for HS2's corner, I started as an agnostic for HS2, and then people started throwing Hyperloops at me, and I had to go, oh God, I have to look at what this is. So I started looking at it, started understanding it, and it was just staggering. And actually it became quite fascinating, because it embodies so much that's wrong with the wider discussions about mobility and about transport in this wild story of this made-up nonsense that essentially was created by Elon Musk to try and derail California high-speed rail. It's an interesting tale, and hopefully it's probably possibly the most fun chapter in the book. Actually, I enjoyed writing it, and there's a lot of fun stuff in there. But hopefully some really instructive stuff. And actually, by looking at this nonsense, we get to understand why rail is quite good. So it's quite a useful device in a way, as a rhetorical device, to kind of explain why railways are a good idea by then explaining why this sort of techno-babble bullshit is a dreadful idea.
Yeah, it's a great chapter. It's probably my favourite chapter, actually. But it is interesting that he basically just puts this meme. It is a meme. It's like a cultural meme.
Yeah.
And then you get these absolute weirdos, and you mentioned some of their names. I was just looking at their Instagram and their social media output, 7 or 8 years later. Just hucksters, they've gone into Bitcoin or whatever.
Bitcoin, Davos. They're doing they're on the audio tour. They've got a book that presumably they've ChatGPT generated. It's just all the. Yeah. It's just and also So you search Bebop Gresta, who's a guy I've met and asked questions, and he got so unbelievably sweaty and defensive when I I did the radical thing of asking a follow-up question. Whoa, really scared him. He is. You just Google him, and all the pictures are him being and they're all from his website. So there's 20 pictures, and they're all from his website, looking very flashy. They're just grifters. That's a really important thing to understand.
So let's just go back to the engineering side of this. The throughput on Hyperloop is 2,000 to 3,000 people per hour.
Yeah.
The Victoria line, if it's really going for it, is 40,000 people per hour. So the Victoria line is maybe between 15 and 20 times more efficient in terms of moving people, not necessarily at the same kind of speed, but at moving people than Elon Musk's Hyperloop.
Yeah. And that's before we even start talking about stations. Because if you've got a bunch of, let's call them trains. These tech bro people go to enormous lengths to pretend that these things aren't trains, because as soon as you measure them against trains, it's not so much that people talk about capacity, but they start realizing that the similarities, and that they're constrained by by all the same variables. But if you have a station of pods coming in every 30 to 40 seconds, basically you need a catapult to fire human mulch into each of those pods as it goes flying past, presumably, or you need, because it takes maybe 2 minutes to load a train. So if it's 2 minutes and you've got 30 or 40 seconds between pods, how many platforms are we building? So many platforms to get any level of capacity. So it's just, as soon as you start thinking about this in any detail, it just falls to bits.
Could it be that it's a bit like with military planes and refueling? Could it be that you have another pod, you have a station, it takes off?
Yeah, you have a series, it's like Russian dolls, a series of smaller pods.
But it's running parallel to that pod, and they're both going at 200 miles an hour.
Because then how do you get onto the first pod, though?
Well, that would be also you'd have each station would be like a circular route.
But it's what I mean, as soon as you start...
And then it would go onto the main route and then get off again.
Suddenly this thing is the footprint of the city of London, it's baffling. Yeah? But it's fun, but it's really important that we do... The trouble is, we talked about tech journalists, the trouble is the tech journalists And I'm not particularly having a go at them. They're just not equipped.
Have a go.
They're just, well, no, you know what? I've got a lot of tame tech journalists out there who I got onto, starting with Rory Ketland-Jones actually, but started getting them onto knowing that Hyperloop was bullshit, which is great. And I was very pleased. I've got quite a few tame tech journalists who now do ask the follow-up question of, yeah, but how many people does it carry? Because that's the only question you need to ask. How many people does it carry? How does it compare? So yeah, it's a mess, but it's interesting to look at it as it covers the capitalist sort of approach to public transport or not. It covers costs. It allows me to talk about costs and why stuff's expensive. It's great. It's a fun bit of the book, but it's quite a useful bit to talk about why rail is so good. And it takes us on a little bit of an adventure out to Las Vegas as well, which is nice.
And what's gadget ban? You use this word. What's gadget ban?
A gadget ban is something that goes to the nth degree to convince people it's not a railway, but it is basically a tech bro thing made to look. It's like a technology made to convince everyone it's not a railway, but actually absolutely occupies that sphere, and it primarily pushes its tech as the solution rather than. But really, it's just a thing trying to make railways better, but using worse ideas and essentially trying to justify tech bro and car automotive industry cash. So gadget ban's a really nice portmanteau that captures these sorts of like high tech whiz. I do a nice and much neater definition in the book. Actually, I do a little like fake dictionary bit to kind of explain what a gadget ban is. It very neatly describes these sort of bullshit tech solutions. Another thing that I like to describe is the AM/FM dichotomy, right? So you've got AI and reform can fix the NHS. That's fucking magic. FM, right? Whereas like investing in social care, expanding social care budgets in local authorities so that the NHS is no longer the kind of health provider of last resort or the kind of public service of last resort, that's AM. It's messy, it's expensive, it's politically noisy. Therefore, it's not particularly favourable to politicians. The FM thing can never be measured because it never exists. Therefore, you can keep saying it as a solution because you don't get measured. And it's the same for transport. The trouble with railways is that they're actual machines that are messy. You have to dig the ground up to put them in. They're expensive. The people get upset about the fact they're going through their back garden. All this stuff. Whereas Hyperloop, it's FM. It's fucking magic. It doesn't exist. Therefore, you can do wonderful render-out things of it just weaving beautifully through the city without touching anyone's house. It's just bullshit. But this is one of the key kind of rhetorical tools that the tech industry have used to kind of get this stuff so far. Even today, I was getting a journalist messaging me going, "Oh, Swisspod have done the longest Hyperloop test ever," and I said, "It's a fucking model train. It doesn't mean anything. It's nonsense, and it's probably another 2 or 3 million quid of EU funding that they've just sapped up for that thing. Like it's just a racket. It really is." But kind of fun to laugh
also,
at.
I mean, maglev trains, which they're not great, but that is a real technology, and it is very quick.
Yeah,
so it's very strange that like I don't quite understand the niche that Hyperloop is meant to fill.
Well, part of I go through these ploys in a list in the book. One of the other ploy is like the idea that it's new. It isn't. Like it isn't exactly as you say. Maglev's been around since the 1940s. We had maglev we pioneered maglev in the UK, in fact, and then the Japanese have really run with it with their kind of super cool version of the technology that Chuo Shinkansen is being built. But it's enormously complicated, and the only reason the Japanese are building it is because they have already finished building their high-speed rail network. They have it built and have a fully saturated conventional high-speed rail network. China's in a similar situation. They're now looking at the similar technology because they have finished building their conventional high-speed rail network. So now they're like, well, that's now getting full, and we need a bypass for that's going to be quicker. So it's almost like it's the next Russian doll of, well, now that is becoming a mixed traffic railway because we're trying to make the most out of it. So now we need another bypass for the high-speed line. And only at that point do you start thinking about the next technology, because from a resource perspective, maglev is much less energy efficient than steel on steel, because of course it is, because you're making a thing float, which inherently requires, so it's about 4 times more energy required to move the same passenger the same speed for maglev as it is for rail. So where you've built your railway system and say have got limitless supplies of nuclear energy or whatever, let's hope, then you can justify maglev.
Iceland
but
maybe could, right? Because they've got geothermal energy.
Yeah, you've got limitless supplies of free energy. Okay, fine. And the concrete implications cannot be ignored, but fine. Whereas everywhere else where you have not got a fully finished high-speed rail network, we don't need to worry about maglev yet. It's far more important that we build systems that we understand, that we know, and that we can deploy as quickly as possible. And that's just, a couple of rails on sleepers or on slab track. And we know how to do that. We've been doing it for decades.
And like you said, the gadget ban thing of it basically is a license to not do stuff today because there'll be this new disruptive technology in 20 years and actually it'll turn out all that investment was wrong. It's like saying, imagine if we didn't have water infrastructure, we didn't have taps, we didn't have reservoirs.
Well, we don't need to imagine that.
Well, that's true.
It's just at the door.
Thames Water are trying their best. But imagine we didn't have any of that. And then somebody says, look, I really would like running water in my house. And you have these hucksters saying, oh, no, there's going to be this new breakthrough technology. It's going to be like,
Water
like,
2. Water 2 is
water
coming.
Pipes 2, Star Trek. We won't need pipes. It will just, magically appear. And you think, okay, that's fine. Like, I'm probably going to be dead in 45 years. I would let's hope, God willing. I'm 40 years. I would quite like running water in the meantime. And it's like, I would quite like an effective high-speed train. It doesn't need to be something out of a science fiction book.
It needs to exist, right? Just needs to exist.
Just build it.
Yep.
Just build it. And my favorite example of the gadget ban actually is in Padua.
Yeah.
Tell me about this.
Yeah, so Padua is a lovely little city. Most people just go there because it's cheaper to stay there than it is to stay in Venice because it's next door to Venice. It has, ostensibly, a tram system. Except you look a little bit closer and you go, well, those are rubber tires. Because instead of just building regular trams, they allowed an ostensibly kind of conventional transport company to pitch them. At the time it wasn't, but it was later bought up by it. Allowed them to pitch a novel solution that would be cheaper to build and cheaper to run, which was basically a bendy bus with a guided rail and a pantograph. So you build everything that looks like a tram. So all the infrastructure for a tram, but with one less rail. And the consequence of doing that is that this thing smashes the road to bits because just like there are those viral videos of the Chinese tram that followed an optical sort of path and it was really just a bendy bus again. If you put the rubber tires of a bus in exactly the same position every single passage of that vehicle, you will destroy the road. You don't have to go far to see this. Any bus stop, you'll see that the road surface starts you get the kind of cracking, the kind of the whole potholes appearing because the bus comes into the exact same position for the bus stop before going off. Whereas in the other lanes, it has a natural oscillation, so the tires are never quite in the same place, so you distribute the load. But if you put an optical or a physical guide to the bus, it will go in exactly the same path. It will destroy the tarmac because of the fundamentals that differentiate between road and rail. Rail has control over that interface. Steel on steel, you get immense strength in that kind of structure that you've created, and so you can carry many more trains. So the result is that Padova, this lovely city, lovely kind of historic city, university town with, by the way, also a massive industrial area nearby, so a lot of people go through the city. That transit system is now absolutely limited. It cannot be expanded because two things. Number one, you can't carry any more trains on the roadway, on the guideway, because it will just completely fall to bits faster than they can repair it. Number two, this kit is proprietary, which means that you have to go to the supplier of the original kit to build it. And this is another problem with Hyperloop and all of this other gadget ban nonsense, is that the single provider means that you have to go to that single provider to then expand your system if you want to in the next 10, 15, 3 years, despite the VC perhaps moving on. Whereas if you build conventional railways, any old Muppet can build it because it's two rails held at a set gauge apart with adequate support, and you can buy the trains from any company. Anyone can build it because the standards for building railways have been. It's the oldest form of open source technology. They've been around.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, it's
open source.
Yeah, they are open source, so anyone can pick up the standards and go, okay, yeah, I reckon I can build your railway to those standards. The perfect proof of this is that you have modern tram systems in take German cities like Cologne, that has a mixture of its original tram network and the new tram system mixed and matched. This is true in lots of cities, Budapest and lots of others, where you have a mixture of the original century-old tram system and more modern, often called light rapid transit tech that uses the same tracks, and because it's intercompatible, it's open source, and therefore you're not limited by that supplier is now. In fact, the technology to build the Padova sort of guided bus technology is kind of soon to be discontinued. At which point, Padova are stuck. That's it. They have to dig the whole lot up again.
And so they basically they pursued a system which its initial capital costs were lower.
Pretended to be, yep.
Yeah, well, quite. But now they can't grow it. It doesn't carry as many people.
Yep.
Its maintenance costs are higher.
Yeah.
Because they basically went for this.
They have to go and rebuild the road every kind of couple of years. Yeah, absolutely.
And they probably won't be able to get replacement parts at a certain point.
Yeah, because there's a unique tech that runs the thing on the guideway. Again, once those bits start wearing out and the provider of the bits is gone, well, what do? You've just got a load of redundant kit in the way. It is as silly as it sounds. Like you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a rail engineer to think this is silly, you know.
If I was from Padua, I would be very angry with the politicians who made that decision.
Absolutely.
Final question, and we could go on. I could do another 2 hours of this. I don't know if people would want to watch a 3.5 hour
they'd love it.
video about this stuff, but maybe, you know, I would. I've got one more question, which is, what was the British Rail Research Department?
Oh,
time for some patriotism.
Oh, what a beautiful. So the British Rail Research Division department, as it kind of changed names a couple of times as it expanded, was the literally the white heat of technology. In Britain, we talked about innovation. We were innovators for the world. You know, from that division, from that department, from that group of boffins, we have modern high-speed rail. We would not have France, Japan, none of them would have modern high-speed rail without the boffins at the BR Research Department doing research into vehicle suspension and understanding, because we were reaching a point where trains were going 120, 130 miles an hour, and they couldn't really go any faster because the wheel set was wiggle around, and you kind of reached a point where you needed infinitely more energy to get the train to go any faster. Research being done by BR solved that problem, and the technology changes that it proposed were rolled out globally and allowed the rest of the world to have. Not only that, they developed tilting train technology that we then exported and has come back to us via Italy, along with huge numbers of other innovations, including modern signaling. We were talking about signal failures earlier. Modern solid-state signaling was developed, is fantastic, was developed in the UK, developed by the BR Research Division. I honestly could not list off the number of innovations. You know, and this is where, yes, we don't need innovation, we need implementation at the macro level. But in terms of running our railways better, there's loads of innovation you can do in terms of like, we can inspect that better, more quickly, more reliably with this tech, or we can work out how much space we need for trains using this technology, so on and so on. And BR Research Division, based in Derby, shout out to the East Midlands, hello everyone in Barbados. BR Research Division was based there, and the research they did was, some of it was absolutely hilarious, like their development of a genuine UFO. Let's not worry about that. The patents are out there for people to Google. But they also did a huge amount of fantastic research work. And why they managed to do that is because they were part of the bigger whole. They were part of BR, which meant that when a boffin came up with an idea, they could phone up the regional engineer who owned a bit of track and say, can I just try this thing? And the regional engineer would be like, yeah, sure, as long as my track doesn't fall over or trains are fine, absolutely, yeah, go for it. Because of the fragmented nature of our industry today, we simply cannot do that. It's another example of where innovation is stifled by all of those fragments we create, all of the fragments we create, whether it's in the rail industry itself or in our broader economy. And also, those are the main reasons why things cost so much in the UK in terms of infrastructure. Again, is because of those fragments. So yeah, BR Research Division, what a wonderful entity it was, and it's a shame we can't have it anymore, and we will never have it until we reunify the railway into kind of one lump to allow that kind of
what happened
deployment.
to it?
It was privatized. In fact, it was privatized before the mid-90s privatization of BR. It was split off into its own bit, viewed as something that was extraneous to the railways, and sort of pitched off into its own thing, and essentially at that point dissipated and disintegrated, because as soon as it wasn't part of the overall railway core, you couldn't have the phone conversation of, can I just stick this thing under the railway and try it out?
That was the value, right?
That was the value. You could just try stuff. We talk about move fast and break things. Well, in a way, the railway could do that within the reasons of, educated engineers knowing what was safe. But they could go, can I try out these new sleepers under the rails and just put them there for 6 months and see if they survive? And the engineer would be like, yeah, sure, absolutely, go for it. It's almost impossible to do stuff like that, and it takes a huge amount of time to reach the point where you can achieve that on our current railway. As a microcosm of innovation, think about that, but on the wider economic scale.
I mean, that captures so much for me. The idea that actually, when rail in this country was publicly owned, we did have innovation-led design, development, and you privatize it, and you get the complete opposite. It's so at odds. It's the polar opposite of the bullshit force-fed ideology we get. When you privatize things, you get the innovation, you get high tech, and
just nonsense.
It's bullshit. It was a bunch of guys and some women, I presume, but back then it would have been
a disproportionate number of women. Actually, BR Research was pretty decent mix actually compared to the rest of the railway. Genuinely, so yeah,
I think you do mention that in the book actually.
Yeah. It's surprising how much that was a different to the rest of the rail industry, which was very much male oriented, for sure.
But basically, a bunch of people working in a social democratic context. Not valorizing innovation as an end in itself, but just trying to create a better service for everyday people, And that's actually when British Rail, as an industry, was at its most innovative.
Absolutely.
And today's the complete opposite.
And also efficient by today's measures, because BR was an unbelievably efficient way of running a railway. It's the most efficient railway in Europe right up until the early 90s recession. It's also, I talk about the phone conversations. It's also important, as a last point, the phone conversations went the other way, because the railway guy would go, I've got this problem, boffin, could you solve it? And I think it's important to remember that kind of two-way discussion of if we want innovation, we need to be empowering the front line as much as the kind of the back of house stuff. And I kind of want to end on that, and a kind of a bit of a shout out to workers, is that the reason the railway, despite the mess it's in the UK right now, the reason the railways are still working really well, we're way above pre-COVID ridership again, railways are back to being extremely busy, although the patterns might have changed a bit, is not because of management running around without any idea what it's doing. It's because frontline staff have the right incentive of, I want to get a person or thing on the train comfortably, safely, where it needs to be. That frontline incentive is really important. And it's the frontline staff who keep our railway absolutely moving. And it's very easy to lose sight of that when you think about reorganisations and what Labour might do. But it's really important to keep those people front and centre, because they're what keep us moving on our railways.
Gareth, this was a really fun conversation. We could have gone on to talk about George Stephenson and various rail tickets one can buy in Austria and Germany. But I think we'll have you back on. For now, I think that's more than enough. Thank you so much for joining us here on Downstream.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Aaron. Cheers.